So welcome and thank you to everyone for joining today's The Artisan Podcast with special guest Paul Horvath, CEO of Orchard Global Capital Group. Now, Mr. Horvath, he's the CEO of Orchard Global. He co-founded the firm, but previous to that, he was the global head of synthetic credit origination, structuring, and distribution at Merrill Lynch from 2005 to 2008. I presume there's an acronym for that. From 1999 to 2005, Paul was the global co-head of structured credit distribution at JP Morgan, where he helped grow the nascent credit derivatives market. And at the beginning of his career, Paul began at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, where he monitored mortgage-backed securities as well as the bank and thrift industry. He's received his Bachelor in Science in Economics, International Relations, and Theology from Georgetown University, and earned his MBA from Harvard Business School. Mr. Horvath is the trustee of the National Cathedral School, as well as serving on their finance committee and chairing their investment committee. In addition, he's a trustee of the Washington National Cathedral, where he serves on both the finance and investment committees. He's on the board of regents of Georgetown University and is an active member of the Johns Hopkins Physics and Astronomy Advisory Council. And Paul is also the chairman of the board of the Hungarian American Institute. And I've been, I've met Paul quite a few times personally, and it's always been a real pleasure given his insights and the discussions we've had. And I know he has an incredible depth of politics, finance, and economics. And I'm very eager to hear Paul share his thoughts today. Now, one of the things I want to jump into is successful investing. It's always about the people. And I'd like to begin with Paul's journey to co-founding Orchard Global Asset Management, OGAM, and maybe some of the challenges he overcame through life, through school, and the earlier parts of his career.
Thanks, Arthur. First of all, thank you for everything that you're doing in the private wealth community in North America. And obviously, special thanks to be able to chat with you today, and of course, with your high net worth clients and investors. Interesting question. I'm glad that you asked it. I think it's kind of I always want to know people's backgrounds and where they come from and how they got there before I interact with them. When you talk about how the long journey that got us to founding and ultimately trying to make Orchard as successful as it can be, it actually goes back to your introductions. The basic ideas for what we're doing were really created early in my career after I graduated Georgetown and started out at the Federal Reserve. Now, look, let's not overplay what I was doing at the Fed. I wasn't sort of hanging out and setting interest rates with Greenspan, but I was actually holding the coffee for the people who were advising Greenspan on setting rates. And it was an amazing insight into really how the Federal Reserve and governments and central banks help assist and control the economy. Now, I was there at a very special time. I started in the late 80s, early 90s, which you'll remember was right in the heart of the savings and loan or thrift crisis. And I learned many things at the Fed, but the one lesson I learned at the Fed that's very relevant to what we do at Orchard is the following. I learned that he or she or they, that investor from the private sector that works with the central bank, that works with the sovereign to help recapitalize the banking system during and after times of financial crisis can make a supernormal return. And when I was with my econ degree, as you mentioned, I said to my bosses, how can you give these private investors such amazing deals? They said to me, our job is to make sure that the banking system is solvent. Because if you don't have banks, you don't have lending. If you don't have lending, you don't have jobs. If you don't have jobs, you have revolution. So as they pointed out to me, if they have to cut a deal with some private investors to induce capital into the banking system, if that means somebody makes some money along the way, well, that's capitalism. And I saw, as names that you'll all remember, the Bass Brothers, Rainwater, Bonderman, Tom Barrack, Jerry Ford, Ron Perlman, and others. The Fed and the FDIC would go and say, "Hey boys, here's this Texas thrift. We really want to stick around. Here's the investment proposition. Go ahead and put capital into it. If things don't go well, the government's got your back as close can be to principal protected. And unless you really mess things up, you're going to make a 15 to 20% return compounded over many years. And so, I said to my father at the time, who I still get career advice from, I said, Father, if I ever see an opportunity this good, please give me the strength to stop whatever I'm doing. I want to be involved in this, not as a regulator like I was at the time, or as an agent, which is what I did for many years at JP Morgan and Merrill Lynch, but as a principal. So I had that idea in the back of my head, and that really was started in the late 80s, early 90s. Now, fast forward to my time at JP Morgan. JP Morgan, as you noted, really in the late 90s, they created the credit derivatives market, really as a way of for banks to share risk with other non-bank investors. And in so doing, they came up with a very efficient way for a bank to recapitalize, or what we call shore up its tier one capital ratios without having to issue equity, which can be very useful at times. And it was based on, over a year of negotiations between JP Morgan and my former employer, the Fed, and a year or so with the rating agencies, that in the mid to late 90s, they came up with this better way, this capital relief or better way of raising capital, or more efficient way anyways, or more targeted way. So once they did it on their own balance sheet, they said, hey, this would be pretty cool to share with other banks. Maybe not their US competitors, but JP Morgan had always had a history of being a banker to foreign sovereigns and foreign banks. So they actually hired me to help export that financial technology to the non-US world. I had been working in London for the previous 5 years exporting US-based financial technologies. And so what I did is I took these geniuses from JP Morgan and I introduced them to over 150 of my non-US bank contacts at the board and CEO level. My regulatory background came in handy because we had to get 14 other regulators, Bank of Japan, BaFin in Germany, the Swiss bank, Bank of Italy, Singapore, you name it, to approve in their countries the balance sheet optimization that the Fed had approved in the US. And in the 99 to 03 period, as JP Morgan, about 50 of those banks said yes, and we did almost 160 billion of this bank recapitalization. Now, we weren't the only ones. We did a deal with Deutsche Bank early on. They reverse engineered the technology, became our biggest competitor, which actually helped grow the market. So between us, JP Morgan with about 50% market share, Deutsche Bank, Goldman Sachs, a couple of others, as an industry, we did about 300 billion of this stuff. Now, it was the thing that, first time in history really, where you had a credit downturn. The 01-02 credit downturn was pretty severe. You had first time in history, you had a credit downturn without a banking crisis. So that really proved the technology, if you will, the efficacy of the technology. So you didn't see a lot of these bank optimizations, as I call them, or capital relief transactions from 03 to 07 for two reasons. One, banks didn't need capital. They were buying back stock from retained earnings. But two, the rules changed. The so-called Basel I banking regulations became Basel II and was well on its way to what we have right now, which is Basel III. However, in 2007, when we were at Merrill Lynch, we were advising the Royal Bank of Scotland, the very acquisitive Royal Bank of Scotland, on a very large acquisition. Sir Fred Goodwin of the Royal Bank of Scotland really wanted to buy a Dutch bank, ABN AMRO, and a 100 billion hostile takeover of that bank. Now, I actually advised them not to do it, but they wanted to do it. And I said, well, okay, if you're going to do something that large, you're going to need capital from everywhere. So I actually took my best guy, John Young, who's my current partner and our CIO. I threw him over the Chinese wall, and he worked with the Dutch and UK regulators with Royal Bank of Scotland, ABN AMRO, and we came up with a Basel II/Basel III compliant version of this bank recapitalization, and that merger was done. So it's late 07. And any of us who were in credit or structured credit knew that the party was over and that there was, winter was coming, so to speak. So it's late 07, and we had a solution to the banking crisis that the banking system didn't yet know that it had on its hands. It was just a matter, it was not an if, it was a when is this banking crisis coming. There was only one problem. I was working at a bank. So it was really at that time when I started returning the calls from my the sovereign wealth friends in the Arabian Peninsula and Southeast Asia, who had been for the previous couple of years telling me, leave banking, come take our money, work with us and manage money for us. And in 07, with this new technology, I finally returned those calls. It teamed up actually with some Canadians who were, one in particular who's of Singaporean origin. And we created Orchard, moved the headquarters to Singapore, and the rest is history. So that's how we got here, Arthur. Maybe just to add, so why should this matter to any investors? I'll try to make it simple, but what I learned, and I'll talk about Larry Summers later, but Larry Summers taught me, former president of Harvard, but former Treasury Secretary. He said, if you can ever be investing in a market where some of the other players are doing things for non-economic reasons, that's a market you want to be in. And that's how I see this working with banks and solving problems with banks. To make it very simple, if I share risk with a bank and the credit risk that I'm taking, the fair market return for that in the normal sort of public markets would be, say, 6 or 7%. If that bank, for its own reasons, which we'll get into, will let me take some of that risk off their hands at, say, 9, 10, 11, or even 12%, well, what's going on is the bank is subsidizing my taking of that credit risk. So very simply, if by solving a problem for a bank, I can get 6% risk, but get paid in the extreme at 12%, well, guess what? I'm going to outperform most of the market. And that's, now, the banks don't do it because they're idiots. They do it because they have a problem and they need a solution. If you have a portfolio of loans and the regulators say, hey, you need more capital going forward, you can A, stop lending, but banks don't like to stop lending. B, you can issue equity. Well, equity is pretty expensive. It's dilutive, and that can be a 20% cost of equity. Or C, work closely with an Orchard to do a targeted recapitalization at, say, 12%, which is more than the 6% that we should be getting paid, but it's a lot less than the 20% they'd have to pay in the equity markets. That's really at the heart and the core of what we do everywhere across Orchard, is we provide solutions for our issuing clients, the banks, and our investing clients. And in so doing, we like to think that we get supernormal returns in the process.
Wow, that's fantastic. It's a real niche area, but obviously the system needs it to make it work. Now you brought up some of your Middle Eastern connections and how they suggested that you leave the banks and come help them manage some of their capital. But from what I understand, I mean, these the sovereign wealth funds, pensions, foundations, some of these entities have hundreds of millions, even billions of dollars invested with your firm. These aren't retail investors, although there might be individuals behind some of the sovereign funds that it's basically their money. But how did you create these connections? What do these institutions and these investors look for? It's a lot of capital to place at risk with one firm, and there must be something different than what we see dealing just with individual families. Can you maybe elaborate on that at all?
Yeah, it's a good question, and thanks for asking it. You said something in your introduction, which I think is true, and if not all investing, most investing, at least with these very large clients, and it's especially true when it comes to the sovereign wealth community. It's about the people. it's about trust. One of the reasons why I'm relatively open, some firms are very secret and quiet about their strategies. One of the reasons we're quite open um, is, well, for sure we're proud of whatever little things we've been able to achieve, but I also think it's not very easy to replicate, because most of the relationships with these banks are 20 years in the making. It's a 20 years of trusting each other. Same thing with our largest investors. I've been going to the Arabian Peninsula for better part of 25 years. I've been going to Southeast Asia for the better part of 20 plus years. And my Canadian colleagues have had the relationships they've had with those investors for the better part of 30 years. And it's amazing, if you have a superior technology, albeit maybe a little bit harder to explain than others, which, by the way, is a good thing. If it's easy to explain, it's easy to replicate, and the arbitrage goes away. But if you have a superior technology and you have friends and counterparties with whom you've been doing business for a decade or two or three, well, you come to trust them and share a lot more than maybe others would. But they trust you. It's a big world, but it's a small world. And I think it was Warren Buffett who said reputations take decades to build and can be lost in seconds. The rules are very clear, and it's true with the Canadian pension investors. It's true with the U.S. state funds, and it's definitely true with the sovereign wealths. You misbehave once on one transaction, that relationship is over. So far, we've been able to avoid that. And look, you have ups and downs. Markets go up and down. That's not what they're worried about. They never want to be in a position where they feel taken advantage of. So I think that's a real sort of installed base defendability. So long as we're continuing to perform or outperform, and it's just more cement to build that strong sort of solid granite bed of trust that is the most important thing. I would say it should be in all investing, but is essential with the, as you say, the 100 billion, and up community. The other thing I would say is that where some of our competitors may be making a mistake is they go to these large pools of capital and they say, look, here's a product we want to sell you. Sometimes that works. If it's a very good product, fine. But how I mentioned that we get close to the banks and get super normal returns to the banks because we provide a solution for their problem? Same is true with these very large, sovereign wealth or pension investors, because they have problems. And if we can solve them, well, then we're going to get more of their money. They don't give it all day one. They give you a little and they see how you do and you grow and you grow. But the biggest problem that, whether it's pensions in the US, I know the number's a little bit better than in Canada, but most pensions need to make 7 or 8% returns. The more mature ones need that to be in cash. They don't want a lot of volatility around those returns. And for this part of their portfolio, equities and ventures is different. They really need as close can be to capital preservation. Right. So, when the 10 years gone up to 3% in the US in the last couple of weeks, but even at 3%, but for sure when the 10-year is at 1 or 2%, if your risk-free rate is at 1 or 2% and equities are all over the place and people think on a forward-looking basis they're going to be 6, 7, 8%, yet you're looking for 8, 9, 10%, that is a problem for which a solution is needed. Again, because we're able to get, in my earlier example, 9 to 12% returns on 6% risk, what we can do is we can take that and package that into a solution to a pension where we say, look, we have this risk that it's about 6 or 7%, is what we should get paid, but actually we're getting paid 10, 11, or 12. So solution number one is if you want to take a little bit more volatility, well, we won't hedge that. And we'll just give you that, 10, 11, 12, which is more than you need so that you can pay for other parts of your portfolio. Or Other pensions that we work with or sovereign wealths, a little bit more defensive. And they say, you know what? It's great that you're getting paid 12 or 9 for what we think is 6 or 7% risk. Why don't you do this? Why don't you spend a couple hundred basis points, buying some, some hedging? We've been doing that for a long time, but I'll tell you, COVID was terrible for the world and terrible for the people. But COVID, it did do one thing. It sort of proved a point that we've been making to our investors for the better part of the last decade, which is we believe that Orchard doesn't have necessarily the best returns, but rather we like to think that Orchard has one of the best risk-adjusted returns.
One of the things, though, that I noticed, and I've been fortunate to attend, some of your dinners and some of your presentations, in Washington, D.C., was really the depth of Orchard's network. And it's deeper than most other, hedge funds or even private equity firms that we've dealt with. And, some of the people that, was very fortunate to hear speak, live and to meet, of course, was Dr. Larry Summers, but also, to bring in former heads of the NSA and to have real conversation about potential, geopolitical risks around the world. Those were very, very valuable. And, as a firm, you must hear a lot from these sources. Given what we're hearing going on in Europe today, for the past couple of months, as well as, we're seeing, a very tight Fed for the first time since the early 80s. Orchard must see a lot, hear a lot. And I think it would be great to get some insight to maybe the unique things or views that you're hearing.
And no, absolutely. I mean, look, Arthur, what you're speaking to is at the core of what our vision for Orchard is, should be, and strives to be every day. And it derives principally from the following. The world is interconnected. We all know that. And certainly since that's one concept. So you want to be global, which is why we're Orchard Global. But also, and this is especially true since 2008, what governments do and don't do matters for investing. What the Fed or the ECB says or does has as much or more to do with returns as anything else that you can do, equities, credit, or rates or FX research on. So it's not just global macro, and we're not a global macro player, but if you invest in maybe if you're, I don't know, in some kind of pharma tech or something, you can just hang out in the lab. But if you're doing what we do, if you're working with the, 20 or 30 largest banks in the world, in the 14 most important economies in the world, you need to have a global perspective, and you need to be at the nexus of where Washington meets Wall Street, where Berlin meets Frankfurt, where Basel meets Zurich. You get the picture. And, lots of our competitors, they get whatever information they get by hiring analysts or credit folks or whatever. Good for them. And some do it better than others. Many of them hire friends of mine in DC and New York and London. Just given our backgrounds, we like to do it ourselves because we like to think that we get better information by actually being involved. Look, myself, John Young, our CIO, Andrew Weber, one of our other founding partners, we are global by our nature. We're from Texas, New Mexico, and Colorado, but we spent a large part of our careers in London and in Asia and in the Middle East. So we don't just talk about being global. We are globally present. We're headquartered, in Singapore. We have significant operations. Our largest operation is in London. We have a DC presence, a Toronto presence, a New York presence, and a Houston presence. So you really learn things by being global. But to your other point, you learn things by being there in the room with the people who are making policy, have made policy, and will make policy. So, because if you travel around the world and you also hang out with the people who regulate the financial markets as well as the people who invest in it, we like to think you get insights, important insights that have relevancy to investing before they hit the financial press. And you mentioned Dr. Summers. At that very symposium that he had, he warned us a year or two early, even before COVID, watch out for inflation. And that made us very attuned to when, the Biden administration took over in, early 21, and they were considering what size of rescue package to put. Well, they put out something that was 1.9 trillion and paid people even more than in the past not to work. They increased unemployment benefits from 400 a month to 600 a month, which sounds like a good thing. Why not pay people? A lot of people lost their jobs in COVID. The problem is at 600 a month, if you do the math, if you're making less than 52,000 a year, it makes more sense not to work than to work. Well, one thing I did learn at Harvard Business School, there's a lot of books written on what they don't teach you at Harvard Business School. Well, here's what I did learn at Harvard Business School. People respond to incentives. If you pay people not to work, well, they're not going to work. And, he's a Democrat, but he said, hey, I love the new administration. I'm glad that it's Democrat. And actually, Jason Furman, who's also a Democrat, who is Obama's, version of Larry Summers, they were saying, guys, you can't do this. Not because we're taking sides on Republicans versus Democrats, but I know we haven't had inflation for the last 2 or 3 decades, but we're going to, and it's going to be a problem. And, I don't know how many people listen to them, but we certainly listen to them. And we had those conversations with them. And, if you know that it's coming, again, we're not running a macro hedge fund, but you can position for it and get ready for it. You mentioned another person who we had at one of our roundtables or symposium, General Keith Alexander. He was NSA director for 9 years, but maybe more interestingly, he was the first commander of Cybercom. And I'll tell you what, obviously being an Asian manager, we have insights into what's going on in China, but it was really General Alexander who forced my eyes and all of our eyes open. No, you don't understand. This isn't just the next adversary. This is Cold War 2.0. Cold War 1.0 was with the Russians over nuclear weapons. And we're getting version 1B right now. We can get to that later if you're interested. But Cold War 2.0 is with China, and it's not over tariffs and trades and aluminum and soy. It's over digital dominance. And at that very same symposium where General Alexander was talking about it, as you remember, we had Republican and Democratic senators disagreeing on most things, but they in unison were agreeing with General Alexander. And intelligent senators, some of the most intelligent and thoughtful senators, were saying, you know what? General Alexander is right, and we need something that looks like a complete or partial decoupling from the Chinese economy. Now, we can debate whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. 100% decoupling is never going to happen or can't happen. We'll never say never, but it's unlikely to happen. But even if we get partial decoupling, well, that has real and present investing, opportunities and pitfalls. The one that we focus on most is if there's deglobalization and decoupling, two themes that sadly have been happening a lot in the last, or maybe necessarily in the last 2 or 3 years. Well, guess what? Banks are going to need a lot more capital. That helps our bank regulatory capital business. But also the supply chains and infrastructure in the West that's been depending on China maybe is going to depend less. So guess what? Governments and companies are going to need a lot more real CapEx capital. And that's why we have specialized funds that deal with growth capital. And actually, we're launching with one of our banking partners a opportunistic infrastructure, lending facility. So we don't hang out with these government officials and the international officials just because it's kind of a cool thing to do or makes for a good conference. We're very focused on our day job, which is trying to get the best risk-adjusted returns for our investors. But we feel that is a critical and differentiating way of getting insights that others, so that we can position for our investors, and then again be a little bit ahead of the game and try to deliver supernormal returns. So that's why we do it. And the how, it's funny how it works. The more you do that stuff, the more you throw the party and the more interesting the party is, the more people want to come to the party. And I'll tell you what, and this is where two or three things come together. Guess what? If you get that many interesting people in the room, guess who wants to be there also? Our sovereign wealth and pension investors. Guess who wants to be out there also? Our big bank, our big bank counterparts. I'm doing something next week. I'm on the board of the American Friends of the Munich Security Conference, and we're bringing the Munich Security Conference to the U.S. next week. And we're having all of the security heads and chiefs and senators and names that some of them you and others have met. But guess what? We have the CEOs of one or two of the banks who are like, wait a second, can I get a ticket to the party? And the answer is, of course, absolutely, because they want to be informed as well. And that helps, like I was saying earlier, build that trust. So that's sort of that virtuous circle. As I said, if you throw the most interesting parties, people want to come and they bring their own ideas, which makes the next party even more interesting.
Yeah, no, I have to thank you for some of those. I attended a dinner during the Milken conference a few years ago, and the connections that I built were incredible, and the insight that we get to see just because of attending that dinner that Orchard Global hosted it's really appreciated. So thank you so much for that. One of the things that we really haven't spoken about too much, though, is Europe. It's getting a lot of front page news now, but I mean, do you have a corporate view of what's going on in the Ukraine? What can be shared and maybe what how much can we talk on this? It's just it's concerning to a lot of people.
No, I mean it should be, and it's very sad. And for my own family, there's a personal angle. My father was one of the student. He was one of the student protesters who, along with the revolutionaries, really started the Hungarian Revolution in 1956 when he was 17, 18 years old. And everything that's going on in Mariupol and Kiev and Lviv now in Ukraine, and my father lived through, in Budapest in 1956. And, he's not shocked by the just total lack of any regard for human life and dignity that's going on by the Russians. I was brought up in a household like that and have always been very strongly biased against, Russia's an amazing country, an amazing history and culture, but it, at least in the last 100 years or so, has been a pretty bad actor, and they're really not covering themselves in glory, nor are they helping themselves right now. There's sort of two ways to answer the question that you're asking. One is on a geopolitical, moral, humanitarian level. We are investors as well, so I'll try to answer it on that level also. Look, and what's happening in Ukraine, a couple things to focus on. Putin has miscalculated, and we know why. He has committed something like 3/4 of his entire conventional forces into this conflict. And because of his own sort of corruption and hubris, but also an incredible amount of help from the West and from NATO, but specifically from, I don't know what name they give it for, but from really the Canadians, along with the Americans, but the Canadians who've really led the charge in this, but the Canadians, the Americans, the Australians, and the Brits. They didn't start helping the Ukrainians, 3 weeks ago or 10 weeks ago. They really started in 2014 and even before that. But after Crimea, Canadian Special Forces, British, US, have been training command and control. Okay, this is what's going to happen, not if, but when Putin makes his move, and this is how to prepare for it. Yes, giving weapons, but really giving, how do you organize yourself in a way to be able to deal with this threat? And so a special thanks, to the US military, but our Canadian friends, our British friends, and our Australian friends in helping them prepare. Number one. Number two, it's starting to get more public press, but what is not a secret is intel. These advanced militaries of the 4 or 5 countries I mentioned, they have an incredible air advantage, 7-1 versus NATO, but probably a much higher number than that to 1, intelligence. And if, somebody's sitting in a mountain somewhere in a mountain somewhere in Virginia or Utah or some other undisclosed location, can call up a commander in the field, in eastern Ukraine, or when the battle was in the West, and saying, okay, there's that long column of tanks, but that's the one with the one. If you get that one, that's the colonel. You take that one out. The rest are conscripts. They don't know what to do. Most of them want to desert. They literally have their cell phones and they're calling their moms, asking to be taken home so we can capture them and use that intel. Let's not underestimate. And that, how much that's helped the Ukrainians. And of course, their incredible resolve and the incredible political leadership that they've shown. I want to just pause and repeat something that I was at a dinner a couple of days ago with Mike Pompeo. So I can't claim credit for this. I got to properly footnote it. But he just said, leadership matters. And he said, look at the difference between Zelensky in Ukraine, and I can't remember the name of the guy who was running Afghanistan. But, bad things started. The Taliban came in Afghanistan, and the leader of Afghanistan was on the first U.S. Air Force military plane out of there, and you saw what happens. When we offered that to Zelensky, he said, I don't want to ride, I want weapons. And he got out in the streets and said, I'm here and I'm ready to fight. And that makes a difference. So let's recognize that as well. But getting back to what I was saying is, because of all of the good work that's been done over the last 8 or 9 years in training and all the weapons and other assistance that's happened, the bringing together of NATO that I think the Biden administration actually has done a good job of, the flexibility finally from the Germans, which I never thought would come, but finally did come at the right time, as well as other NATO allies. We are painting Putin into a very interesting, but very scary box. People are focusing the upside just fine, because to a normal, educated, non-Russian, it looks like they're under pressure. Well, Putin doesn't have to vote and get reelected, but he does have to stay in power. There's no Putin presidential library that he gets to retire to. He loses, literally, he's dead. So all of the successes that we've had so far in working with our Ukrainian partners have created a situation that is a very binary outcome. Peggy Noonan in the Wall Street Journal made a very compelling case. Hey, boys and girls, understand what's at play here. It is a very real possibility. It is in the Russian playbook to use tactical nuclear weapons. Not strategic, which is ICBMs hitting, London or Washington, but tactical. And it is the belief of the Russians that if they use tactical nuclear weapons, neither NATO nor the US would respond or respond accordingly, because they would get afraid and take their ball and go home. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to happen, nor is Peggy Noonan, but that has gone from like a 1% possibility to, I don't know, maybe not 50, but 20, 30, 40% possibility. And not that the Western governments sit around and ask for my advice, but to the extent that they do, we're sort of pressuring them. You need to get ready for what your response will be. And please, please, please don't tell us and don't tell anybody, but have one. And there's a couple of different responses. Now, I was privileged enough to have, Ambassador Bolton, former NSA director, and ambassador to the UN. I had him at a dinner 2 nights ago. As much of a hawk as he is, he doesn't think that Putin will pull the trigger. I hope he's right, but he may, because he may have no other choice. And if he does, we need to be ready. So that's, if you will, a little bit of insight from the front. My best guess is what's going to happen, which is terrible for the people of Ukraine, and I would say for the Russians. I don't think this thing gets resolved anytime soon. I think this is going to be a grind it out, battle it out. You see every day the Russians making more mistakes, getting, it was a catastrophic mistake on the Russians' part, which even Putin had to walk back. I think Lvov started talking about how, Hitler had Jewish blood and how it's okay. I mean, I understand what he's trying to do. He's trying to pass this Nazi, we're stamping out Nazis in Ukraine, but that got very, very harsh response from Israel and other places. So that tells me that they're really losing the plot a little bit. But that doesn't mean that there's going to be a coup tomorrow. So I think it's really, sadly, for the Ukrainians and for the Russian soldiers and the Russian people, I think that conflict is going to be around, for a long time, and until it's not. One day, a straw that will break the camel's back will happen, and either it's going to be very bad because we're going to go nuclear, or the collapse will happen. But I'm not sort of sitting around, expecting it to happen anytime soon. What I will say to conclude, though, is we need to understand where we are in history right now. I believe, and I don't think I'm speaking hyperbole here. I believe that what happens in the next 3 weeks to 6 months or a year is as important sort of inflection point in history as 44 and 45 were. That was the last time we had something this big. That doesn't mean we have to start hyperventilating, but it means that whether we're talking about policymaking in Germany or Europe or the US or Canada or Australia or wherever, or Japan, maybe it's time to stop fighting over the silly things that we fight over, taxes and culture. Come together and say, wait a second, this is both an existential threat to sort of not even Western or democratic liberalism and rule of the people. And by the way, if we get this right, we can actually take territory. But if we get it wrong, it's not like we're going to go away, but you could imagine a block of China with a disabled Russia, i.e. cheap source of natural resources, teaming up with an Iran, a Venezuela, a couple of other, folks who don't believe in rule by the people, of the people, for the people. And we just need to understand when we're setting our priorities, when we're voting and when we're setting budgets, this is one of those times, to take it seriously. Eisenhower, who was in the middle of the Cold War, ramped up the defense budget to 10% of GDP. Right now, we're just getting the Germans up to 2% and the US is down to 3%. Maybe we need to change. No, I can talk about investing if you want, but I wanted to pause to give you a sense.
Yeah, no,
shut up for a
second.
Second.
Absolutely, great critical insight. It's, from our point of view, you were comparing it to the 40s. I'm worried more that it's, it could be more like the First World War, where different governments get pulled in for all sorts of reasons and all sorts of provinces that were done behind the scenes. And I would hate to see it spiral out of control. And the points that you brought up about Putin getting painted into a corner, I know strong policy makes for better negotiations, but sometimes it might be good to give him an out. How do you let him back away or back down with his head held high somewhat? because again, if he loses power, he potentially loses his life, and that's the ultimate in game theory. I don't think he wants to go down as a martyr. Definitely.
Well, not to be too tongue in cheek, but there's no Putin is going to, after this May 9th, this more muted May 9th celebration that he's going to have, he is, because he has Parkinson's and he has some form of cancer. I think it's bowel cancer, but it's something that involves, that necessitates a procedure. There's a lot of folks all over the world hoping that, that when he goes under the knife, he doesn't wake up. I don't think that's going to happen, but there's certainly no lack of people, praying for that outcome. All joking aside, and I full disclosure, I probably hanging out with a few too many hawks, and whether that's John Bolton on the Republican side, or I actually did, and I have some before the war, and it's, you can see on my Twitter account and LinkedIn account, did some interviews with General Wesley Clark, who was the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. What we're really trying to do there, message to Putin, message to German Chancellor Scholz, and message to Macron is there anything we can do to stop this from happening? But he's a Democrat, Bolton is a Republican, Pompeo is a Republican, and they're all saying the time for off-ramps is over. There's too much, they probably know more than we all do about just how much of the atrocities have actually happened. And that, and this is one view, it is a more American view, it's a more aggressive view, but it's a view, and I think I probably subscribe to, that we can't run around being afraid of the nuclear threat. We need to be strong, we need to be unified, and we need to be basically saying the sanctions will stop when all Russian troops are pulled from all parts of Ukraine, including Crimea, period. Now, would we all allow, or should we all allow UN or NATO or somebody else to come in and protect whatever Russian minorities are in Ukraine so that there's not retaliation? Absolutely, that's on the table. But my own view, and I'm acknowledging it's a hawkish view, but it's one that I subscribe to, is, it's kind of like last exit before the toll. I think that's where certainly people in this town, I'm doing this podcast in Washington, believe. So, I don't know, maybe that leads us to nuclear war, but that is very much the prevailing thinking. Now, let's look beyond this conflict. A lot of doom and gloom here. We are investors, and let's look to opportunities. If and when this does get resolved, so hopefully sooner rather than later, one thing we're certainly focused on and starting to prepare for is there could be an incredible Ukrainian recovery-driven economic boom that really will require capital, and that's what we do. Remember, we're the solutions guys. And when you give capital to people who really need it, you tend to get supernormal returns. To give you a flavor for how profound that boom could be, or that opportunity, let me take you back to something totally different, which is 2005 and Hurricane Katrina. Now, in 2005, Ford and GM in March of 2005 were downgraded to sub-investment grade. Everything was looking like Q3, Q4 2005, we were heading towards, in the US anyways, towards recession, or I would say in North America, because Canada was right there with the US. And then something unexpected happened, Hurricane Katrina. And what happened was 150 billion that was sitting in insurances, investment portfolios, in a very short amount of time was put forth to rebuild, Louisiana or New Orleans. That one little rebuilding of a city, it wasn't that little, was able to cause such a boom that what was supposed to be the recession of 05 ended up being the boom of 05, 06, 07, and put off what ultimately happened in 08 for 2-3 years. That's a city in a relatively poor state. There's 44 million, or there was 44 million, there's 5 million have left. There's 44 million Ukrainians who didn't have the most up-to-date infrastructure to begin with. But you know that if and when the Russians do leave and we get back to some modicum of normalcy, the amount of money that's been coming in from the Americans, from the Europeans, from the Western, the democracies of Asia, there is going to be an incredible investment in turning. I mean, the Ukrainians are talking about how do we turn Ukraine into the Israel of Central Europe. And because they're so critical to food and we're talking about 44 million people, this literally could, I mean, the upside scenario is somehow there's a peace soon and we get back to the rebuilding part, and let's not miss out on that opportunity. I don't think it's going to help inflation very much, but it could really, it could be responsible for a half a decade or decade of prosperity and profitability for those people who help, turn Ukraine from the mess that it is into to quote Zelensky, the Israel of Central Europe. Right. So let's not leave this call being too bummed out. There's opportunity there, but we just have to be tough and make sure that we make decisions that help increase the chances of the good scenario rather than the bad scenarios that I painted before.
No, absolutely. I think we all want to see it resolved as peacefully as possible and as quickly as possible. That would be the best for the people of the Ukraine. I want to thank you so much today for your time, Paul, and your insights. These are very different than what we hear, on television, reading social media or the news, and to get this deep insight and leading edge insight is critical to helping us serve our families. So thank you to everyone at Orchard Global. Thank you, Paul, again. And we look forward to continuing our relationship and growing it with your firm.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And lots of prayers for our Ukrainian friends. Slava Ukraina. Goodbye.
Thank you.